The manila folder weighs almost nothing. That is the thing I keep thinking as I stand here, that something this light could cost a man $400 million. The edges are soft now, rounded from months of handling, from being opened on kitchen counters and closed in closets and slid into diaper bags between formula cans and burp cloths. There is a crease on the front cover where my daughter's fist closed around it one morning while I was warming a bottle. She was 3 months old. She grabbed it the way babies grab anything, without knowing and with. That is the thing I keep thinking as I stand here, that something this light could cost a man $400 million. The edges are soft now, rounded from months of handling, from being opened on kitchen counters and closed in closets and slid into diaper bags between formula cans and burp cloths. There is a crease on the front cover where my daughter's fist closed around it one morning while I was warming a bottle. She was 3 months old. She grabbed it the way babies grab anything, without knowing and without caring. I peeled her fingers off and smoothed the crease and thought, out, caring. I peeled her fingers off and smoothed the crease and thought, you have no idea what you're holding, little one. Neither did I when I first found it. The rooftop is 42 floors above the street, and the December wind is finding every gap in my dress. 3 babies are bundled against the cold. 2 boys in the stroller, my girl in the carrier strapped against my chest. All of them asleep, because God is occasionally merciful to women who have no business being at a party like this. Champagne towers catch light from a chandelier the size of a sedan. The air smells like wintergreen and expensive candles, and across the room, my husband is laughing at something a woman in emerald is saying, his hand nowhere near her but his attention entirely on her, and he has not seen me yet. In about 40 seconds, he will. Have you ever held something so long it became part of your body? Not heavy, not precious, just constant. The way a scar is constant. The way a name you stop saying out loud is still constant in your mouth. This folder has been constant for 7 months. Since the night I found what was inside it. Since the night I stopped being a wife and became something else. Something I do not have a word for yet. Something between witness and weapon. But before the folder, before the clause buried on page 11 that his own attorneys wrote and never imagined would be turned against him. Before the 3 a.m. feedings in a Baltimore studio apartment with a radiator that clanked like someone knocking to be let in. Before all of that, there was a wedding. Mine. It was June. Greenwich. His mother Daphne's estate, where the lawns are cut in diagonal stripes and the hedgerows are shaped by a man who flies in from Zurich twice a year. I remember the weight of Dom Perignon. Dom Perignon, in a crystal flute so thin I was afraid my fingers would crack it. I remember the smell of white peonies in arrangements taller than me, and the way my shoes sank into grass so perfect it felt artificial. 300 guests, a string quartet from Juilliard, and me, a woman from a row house in southeast D.C., where the screen door had a square of cardboard taped over the part the dog pushed through, standing under a trellis that cost more than my mother's car, marrying a man whose last name moved markets. I loved him. Let me say that cleanly, because it matters. I loved Hollis Beliveau with the kind of desperate, wide-open gratitude that poor girls aren't supposed to admit to. He was not just handsome. He was architecture. Tall, deliberate, a jaw that looked like it had been engineered. And when he chose me, when he tilted the whole beam of his attention onto a 24-year-old temp worker who had been answering phones at his venture fund for 3 weeks, I did not ask why. I said thank you. I said it with my whole body. I said it every day for the rest of that year, and I said it when I sat down at a mahogany table 2 days before the wedding and signed a prenuptial agreement I stopped reading after page 4. Page 4. I want you to hold that number, because on page 11, in language so dense and dry it could pass for filler, there was a clause. Clause 14C, and it was the most dangerous sentence I would ever fail to read. And the only reason I am standing on this rooftop tonight with 3 children and proof enough to burn down a kingdom. But I did not know that yet. What I knew was the wedding, the way the late sun turned the estate gold, the way Hollis's hand felt dry and steady when he took mine at the altar. And in the 4th row, on his side, a woman in a seafoam dress pressing a tissue under her eye, like she was moved to tears by the beauty of it all. Genevieve. I smiled at her. I thought, How lovely, one of his friends so emotional for us. I did not know her yet. Not really. I knew her the way you know a shape in a window across the street. There, present, not yours to examine. She was part of Hollis's professional circle, slender, auburn hair that swung like it had a choreographer. She caught my eye during the vows and pressed her lips together in something I mistook for warmth. I thought the wedding was the beginning. It was evidence. The reception was at the main house. Stone terrace, French doors open to the interior hall, candles and iron lanterns lining the steps. I was standing near the dessert table, a tower of macarons in pastel colors I couldn't name, when I turned to find Hollis, a wife's habit already forming. Where is he? Let me be near him. I saw him through the French doors, inside the hallway, half lit, standing with Genevieve. His hand was on the small of her back, not resting, placed, the way you touch someone whose body you already know. She was looking up at him, and he was looking at her, and then, as if he could feel my gaze like heat, he turned his head. He looked directly at me, through the glass, across the candles and the stone and the 300 people who had just watched us make promises. He saw me see him, and he did not move his hand. I want to tell you, I stormed inside. I want to tell you I threw the champagne or said something sharp and bright and final, but I didn't. I turned around. I picked up a macaron, lavender, and I bit into it, and it was sweet and dry and perfect, and I chewed and swallowed and smiled at the caterer and said, "Lovely, thank you," because here is the truth I have never said aloud to anyone before right now. I stayed, not because I believed it was nothing, not because I was naive. I stayed because I could still smell the cardboard on that screen door. I stayed because my mother worked 2 jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on every month. I stayed because the distance between Southeast DC and Greenwich, Connecticut is not measured in miles. It is measured in fear. And I was more afraid of falling back than I was of being betrayed. That shame kept me warm for months, until the night he stopped pretending.
Welcome to the hearth. My name is Mr. Harlan, and I'm grateful you're here. What Corinne just described, signing a document out of gratitude instead of understanding, that is not foolishness. That is what happens when someone offers you a life so far above the one you've known that questioning it feels like ingratitude. And we are taught, especially women who come from scarcity, that gratitude should be quiet, that it should not ask questions or hire its own attorney or slow down a moment that feels like rescue. But gratitude is not protection. It never was. If you remember nothing else from tonight, carry that. Delay the signature. Read every page. Bring your own counsel. Because love that cannot survive your questions was never safe to begin with. If these are the kinds of stories and truths you need, the ones that leave you sharper than they found you, stay close. Like, share, subscribe. This is a place for people who believe that knowledge and compassion belong in the same room. Now, let Corinne tell you what happened when the pretending stopped.
That lie, the one I told myself about gratitude and safety and the reasonable price of comfort, lasted 11 months. 11 months of smiling in restaurants where the bill exceeded my old rent. 11 months of sleeping beside a man whose phone buzzed past midnight and who would rise without urgency, without excuse, and take it in the hallway like it was nothing. 11 months of the scent of something floral and unfamiliar finding me on his collar, on the shoulder of his jacket, once on the cuff of his shirt where someone had rested their chin. But I was learning. That was the thing Hollis never accounted for. He mistook my silence for acceptance. He saw a quiet wife and assumed she was empty. I wasn't empty. I was watching. And a woman who watches, learns. The charity auction was 4 months after the wedding. Fall. The kind of crisp, clean October evening where Manhattan looks like it was designed for people who never carry their own groceries. I wore a black dress I had bought with his card, one of 7 cards he'd given me, all linked to accounts I could use but never saw statements for. I remember checking myself in the mirror of the car, a black sedan with leather seats that smelled like cedar and money, and thinking I looked like someone who belonged. I did not belong. I was performing. Hollis had left the house 2 hours before me. Separate cars. He said it was logistics. He had a meeting first, drinks with a partner at the fund. I said, of course. I said it the way I always said it, lightly, without weight, the way you answer a question you've trained yourself not to ask. When I arrived, I found him in the center of the main hall. High ceilings, white marble floors, auction items displayed on black velvet under spotlights, and Genevieve was beside him, not near him, beside him, her hand on his arm, her laugh tilted up toward his jaw. And the room had already adjusted. No one looked surprised. No one glanced between her and me with the flicker of discomfort that would tell me this was new information. This was not new information, not to them. He didn't hide her. He hid me. I understood that in a single breath, standing near a coat check staffed by two women in black vests who didn't look up. I was the wife on paper. Genevieve was the wife in practice. And everyone in that room, every donor, every board member, every woman holding a numbered paddle and a glass of Sancerre, knew it before I did. I smiled. I moved through the crowd. I placed a bid on a watercolor I didn't want and made conversation with a woman whose name I forgot before she finished saying it. I was excellent that night. Gracious, steady, a perfect surface with nothing underneath, but something underneath was changing. When we got home, I found the jacket he'd worn draped over the back of a dining chair. I didn't pick it up to hang it. I picked it up because I already knew what I'd find. The collar, the shoulder, the scent, not perfume exactly, something richer, a fragrance with vetiver and cedar undertones that I would later identify by accident in a department store, standing in front of a display for a brand I couldn't afford on my own. It had routine. The scent wasn't an accident. It wasn't a hug at a party or a brush in a hallway. It was embedded, soaked into threads, the kind of transfer that requires closeness, duration, frequency. This was not a lapse. This was a schedule. I went upstairs. He was in the bathroom. Door open. Water running. I stood in the bedroom doorway with the jacket in my hands, and I asked the question I'd been swallowing since June. Are you sleeping with her? The water stopped. He came to the doorway. Toothbrush, still in his hand, white foam at the corner of his mouth, and he looked at me the way you look at a child who has said something embarrassing at a dinner party. Patient, slightly inconvenienced. Corinne, don't do this. 4 words, not a denial, not even a deflection, a reclassification. He turned my pain into my misbehavior. I was not a woman asking a valid question. I was a woman doing something, making a scene, causing a problem. And in 4 words, the conversation was over, not because he ended it, but because I let him. Because that voice in me, the one still smelling cardboard and hearing the screen door slap shut, whispered, don't push, don't lose this, don't go back. I hung the jacket in his closet. I got into bed. I lay there in the dark and listened to him finish brushing his teeth like nothing had happened. Because to him, nothing had. That night, I started noticing Daphne, his mother. I had been so focused on Hollis, so focused on Genevieve, that I had missed the architecture around them, the way the structure was designed. Daphne had welcomed me into the family with the kind of precision that should have been a warning. She hosted a bridal luncheon at her club. She introduced me to the right people. She corrected my pronunciation of Chateaubriand, at a dinner, and then squeezed my hand under the table as if the correction were a gift. But there was one moment I kept returning to. The week before the wedding, after I had signed the prenup, Daphne had invited me to tea in the sunroom, a glass-walled room overlooking her rose garden, everything white and pale green, cups so thin the tea showed through like light through a church window. She asked me about Genevieve, casually, the way you ask about weather. You've met Genevieve, haven't you? She's been a fixture for years? I said yes briefly, at a dinner. Daphne nodded, sipped. Then she said something I didn't understand until much later. She's a practical girl, good head for arrangements. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do, and Daphne watched me smile, watched me the way a jeweler watches a stone being set, checking for fractures under pressure. I passed. I didn't crack. I didn't ask what she meant. And Daphne's posture changed, softened. She poured more tea and moved on to flowers for the ceremony. She had been testing me, Not for strength, for compliance. She needed to know that I would see what the family needed me to see and nothing more. I had signed the prenup unchanged. I had met Genevieve without alarm. I was the right kind of wife. Decorative, grateful, and quiet. What Daphne didn't calculate, what none of them calculated, was that compliance and blindness are not the same thing. A woman who is quiet is not necessarily a woman who agrees. And a woman who watches, who catalogs every glance, every scent, every four-word dismissal, every test disguised as tea, learns things that people with power forget they're showing. I stopped asking Hollis questions. I stopped checking his phone. I stopped performing the role of suspicious wife, because suspicion is loud, and loud people get managed. Instead, I became still. I noticed which nights he came home at 11, and which he didn't come home at all. I noticed the pattern. Tuesdays and Thursdays, occasionally a Saturday when he said he was at the club. I noticed that Genevieve's name disappeared from his mouth entirely, which meant she had moved from something he mentioned casually to something he protected. I wasn't building a case. Not yet. I didn't know what a case looked like. I was just collecting truths, stacking them quietly inside me like bricks in a wall I didn't know I was building.
Pay attention to what Corinne just described. The moment her question became his inconvenience. That phrase, "Don't do this," is not a conversation. It is a door being shut from the inside. And if you've ever heard those words, or words shaped like them, you're being dramatic. Why are you ruining tonight? I'm not doing this right now. Understand what they are. They are not requests for peace. They are reclassifications. Your pain is relabeled as your dysfunction. And once you accept that label, you stop asking, which is exactly the point. If a phrase makes you feel crazy for having a reasonable feeling, that phrase is the red flag, not your feeling. If you want to keep learning how to recognize these patterns before they cost you years, subscribe to The Hearth, because what Corinne did next with that silence changed everything.
That summer, what I had learned finally mattered, because the quiet watching, the cataloging, the discipline of keeping my mouth shut while my mind stayed open, was about to meet something I wasn't prepared for, something that changed the math of my entire life. 2 pink lines in a bathroom I barely recognized as mine. The test was a cheap brand. I want you to hear that. Not because it matters medically. A test is a test. But because of what it meant that I bought a cheap one. I drove 11 miles to a pharmacy in Stamford where no one would recognize me. I paid cash, not a card from one of the 7 accounts. Cash, from a 20 I'd kept folded in the lining of my wallet since before the wedding. Emergency money, my mother taught me that. Always keep a bill somewhere they don't know about. She meant bus fare. She meant running money. I never thought I'd use it to buy a pregnancy test I didn't want my husband to see me take. The bathroom I used was the guest bath on the first floor. Not our bathroom. Not the master, with its heated marble and double vanity and the towels that got replaced every week by a woman named Inez who came on Wednesdays. The guest bath. Cracked grout between the floor tiles. A faucet that dripped. The one room in that house that hadn't been renovated because no one important ever used it. I sat on the edge of the tub, cold porcelain against the backs of my thighs, and I watched the window fill with 2 lines. And my first thought was not joy. It was not fear. It was arithmetic. If I told him, he would have a reason to keep me. If I told him, he would also have a reason to control me more carefully. A child was not a child in that house. A child was a variable, an heir, a complication in a structure that already had its architecture set. Hollis at the center, Genevieve in the wings, Daphne above, and me in the frame like a portrait no one looks at twice. I didn't tell him. Not that day, not that week. 2 weeks later, I sat in a waiting room at a clinic in Bridgeport. Again, not Greenwich, not Stamford. Nowhere his name would echo. And a technician pressed a wand against my stomach and went quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight. She tilted the screen toward her. Tilted it back. Pressed again. I'm going to get the doctor. 15 minutes. I lay there with gel cooling on my skin, and my heart doing something I didn't have a name for. The doctor came in, younger than me. Steady hands. She sat on a rolling stool and looked at the screen and then looked at me. There are three heartbeats. 3 flickers on a gray screen that looked like weather, like static, like the snow on the television I watched as a child when the cable got shut off. 3, not 1. 3. I said, 3 what? She said, 3 babies. You're carrying triplets. And the room became very small and very large at the same time, the way rooms do when the ground shifts and you realize the life you thought you were living has been replaced by one you never planned for. I lay there and I did not cry. I pressed my palms flat against the paper on the exam table, and I thought, 3 heartbeats meant 3 reasons he would never let me leave quietly. 3 reasons Daphne would involve herself. 3 reasons I had to be smarter than I had ever been in my life. I drove home on autopilot, parked in the garage beside his Aston Martin, a DB11, British Racing Green, the car he loved more openly than he had ever loved me. I sat in my car with the engine off, and the garage door still open. And I made a decision. I would not tell Hollis about the pregnancy until I understood exactly what I was standing on. Not emotionally, legally. That night, while he was at dinner, a Thursday, which meant Genevieve, I went into his study. The room smelled like leather and old paper, and the scotch he kept in a crystal decanter on the credenza. His laptop was open on the desk, sleeping, not closed. I touched the trackpad, and the screen woke. His email, already open. I want to be clear about something. I was not snooping for comfort. I was not looking for proof that he loved me or didn't. I had moved past that. I was looking for documentation, for evidence that had shape and weight and dates, the kind of truth that survives someone saying she's crazy in a conference room full of lawyers. The inbox was organized the way Hollis organized everything. Precisely, without sentiment. Folders by name, by project, by fund. And there, between Bellevue Capital Q3 and board correspondence, was a folder labeled G. I opened it. Emails. Dozens. Going back before our wedding. Subject lines clipped and professional on the surface. Aston thing? Tuesday confirmed. Lease update. But the bodies of the emails were not professional. They were intimate. Not explicit. Alice was too careful for that. But intimate the way long relationships are intimate. Shorthand. Inside references. The comfortable grammar of 2 people who have stopped performing for each other. And then I found it. An email from 4 months ago with an attachment. A lease agreement. Upper West Side. Manhattan. 2-bedroom apartment. Hollis's name on the guarantor line. Genevieve's name as tenant. Monthly rent. $14,000. Paid through an account I had never seen referenced on any of the 7 cards, any of the statements I wasn't shown, any of the financial architecture of our marriage. He was keeping her. Not casually. Structurally. With paperwork and payments and the quiet machinery of money moved where a wife wouldn't see it. I photographed the screen. 3 shots. Hands shaking, but the images were clear. Then I closed the laptop, left the study, and went to the bedroom closet where the safe sat behind a panel of suits I never touched. The prenup was in a leather folio. Cream-colored pages, dense type. I had signed it at a mahogany table with a Mont Blanc pen that Daphne handed me, and I had stopped reading at page 4 because the language made my eyes slide off the sentences like water off glass. Now I read every page. Slowly, word by word. The way you read something when you understand that your life depends on comprehension. Page 11. Clause 14 C, subsection A through D. The language was dry, almost boring. It defined material breach through sustained extramarital conduct, and it listed the triggers: financial support of an outside partner, cohabitation or equivalent domestic arrangement, documented correspondence demonstrating an ongoing intimate relationship, and duration exceeding 6 continuous months. The consequence was in subsection D. In the event of verified material breach under this clause, the aggrieved party shall be entitled to equitable redistribution of no less than 40% of all marital and individually held assets, superseding the limitations outlined in sections 3 through 7. 40%. I read it again. And again. I read it until the words stopped being language and became objects. Solid, heavy, real. 40% of everything Hollis Beliveau had. Everything the family had structured, shielded, built over 3 generations. 40%. If I could prove sustained financial support, cohabitation, documented correspondence and duration. I had the emails. I had the lease. I had the payment trail, or at least the beginning of one. I had duration. The emails went back before our wedding. They wrote every clause assuming I would be the problem. They never once considered that the problem might be him. The clause wasn't a gift. It was a door. And doors swing both ways. I sat on the closet floor with the folio in my lap and the photographs on a phone I would destroy within the week. And I cried. Not because I was triumphant. Not because I had won something. Because the last thread of hope, the thin, foolish, stubborn thread that said, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not what I think. Maybe he'll come back to me. Snapped. Strategy was born the same moment hope died. They cannot live in the same body. The next morning, I drove to a gas station in Norwalk and bought a prepaid phone with cash. No contract, no name, no connection to any account he could see. I transferred the photographs to it. I began keeping a log. Dates, times, absences, the pattern I had already memorized. Tuesday, Thursday, occasional Saturday. I was not a woman scorned. I was a woman with a clause, 3 heartbeats, and a folder that was just beginning to take shape. I left on a Sunday. Hollis was at brunch with Daphne, their standing reservation at a club in Greenwich where the omelets cost $40, and the mimosas came in crystal that had to be hand-washed by staff who weren't allowed to make eye contact. I knew I had 3 hours. Maybe 4 if Daphne ordered the cheese course. I packed 2 suitcases. Not the luggage set Hollis had bought me. Monogrammed, caramel leather, heavy even when empty. I used the suitcases I'd brought with me when I moved in. Nylon. Scuffed. One had a broken zipper that I'd fixed with a safety pin 2 years before I ever heard the name Beliveau. I packed clothes, documents, the prepaid phone, my grandmother's handkerchief, white cotton, embroidered edges, soft from decades of washing. It smelled like her apartment, like lavender sachets and radiator heat, and a life where nobody pretended to be anything. I did not leave a note. I carried the suitcases down the back staircase and out through the garage. The Aston Martin sat there gleaming under the overhead light, and I walked past it without looking. I got into a car I'd rented under my maiden name from a lot in Stamford. Paid cash, 3 days. The engine sounded thin and uncertain compared to anything I'd driven in the past 2 years. The drive was 2 hours south. I took I-95 through Connecticut and kept going. Late September. The leaves were just beginning to turn, gold and rust at the edges, and Greenwich disappeared in the rearview mirror the way a dream disappears when you open your eyes. Quickly, completely, like it was never solid to begin with. I drove to Baltimore because no one would look for me there. Not Hollis, not Daphne, not the attorneys whose names I didn't yet know, but whose letterhead I would learn to fear. I had no connection to Baltimore, no family, no history. That was the point. I needed a city that had no thread leading back to any name anyone in that world would think to pull. The apartment was a studio on the 3rd floor of a row house in Highlandtown. I found it through a listing paid with a money order. Cash again, always cash. The hallway smelled like old cooking oil, and the paint on the front door was chipped down to 3 previous colors. Inside, a radiator that clanked at 3 in the morning like someone knocking to be let in. A single window facing a brick wall. A mattress on the floor that I bought from a second-hand store 4 blocks away and carried up the stairs alone because the elevator had been broken since before I was born. I stood in that apartment with my 2 suitcases and my grandmother's handkerchief and 3 babies growing inside me, and I understood something clearly for the first time. Leaving is not a moment. It is not the door closing behind you, or the engine starting, or the highway stretching out. Leaving is what comes after. Leaving is the silence of a room where no one knows your name. Leaving is the radiator clanking and no one beside you to hear it, and no one coming in the morning. Leaving was easy. Staying gone tried to kill me. The first month was survival in its most compressed form. I found a clinic that took patients on a sliding scale. I filled out forms with my maiden name and listed no emergency contact. The doctor, an older woman with reading glasses on a chain and hands that smelled like antiseptic soap, measured me and frowned and said triplets at my size would mean early delivery, probable NICU, mandatory bed rest by month 7. She asked if I had support. I said yes. I was lying, and she knew it, and we both let the lie sit there because the alternative was a conversation neither of us had time for. I did not use Hollis's money. I want to be specific about this because it matters later. Legally, strategically, completely. I did not touch the 7 cards. I did not access the joint account. I did not call the financial advisor, whose number was in my phone. Every dollar I spent came from cash I had saved. Small amounts, skimmed carefully over months from grocery runs and household purchases where I'd get cash back at the register. 20 here, 40 there. I had $11,000 in a zippered pouch inside my suitcase lining. It was not enough. It was what I had. The babies came early. December. 7 months along, and my body said enough. The hospital was a teaching hospital near the harbor. Long corridors, curtains instead of walls between beds, the squeak of shoes on linoleum that never stopped, day or night. The delivery was an emergency cesarean. I was awake for it. I felt pressure but not pain, and I heard them before I saw them. 3 voices, thin and sharp and furious, the sound of people arriving in a world they hadn't agreed to. 2 boys, 1 girl. I named them myself. Alone. In a recovery room with a plastic pitcher of water on the tray table and a whiteboard on the wall where a nurse had written my first name and a smiley face. The boys were 4 pounds each. The girl was 3 pounds 11 ounces. So small that when they placed her on my chest, she felt like a letter, like a folded piece of paper, like something you could lose in a strong wind. They spent 5 weeks in the NICU. 5 weeks of monitors and wires and the steady beep that becomes your heartbeat because your own isn't reliable anymore. I sat between their incubators on a chair with a torn vinyl seat, and I talked to them. I told them about the row house in D.C., about the screen door, about my mother and her 2 jobs, and how she used to sing in the kitchen while the rice cooked. I told them their father's name because they deserved to know it, and I told them he was not here because some truths don't need explaining to people who are 5 weeks old and fighting to breathe. I did not call Hollis. He did not know where I was. But he knew I was gone, and over the next 7 months, the letters came. They arrived at the Greenwich house first, which meant he was guessing, reaching, throwing paper into the dark. Then somehow, I still don't know how, they started arriving at the apartment, the Highlandtown address, forwarded maybe, or traced through some channel I hadn't sealed. The envelopes were cream-colored, heavy stock, his handwriting, precise, slanted slightly left, the penmanship of a man who was taught to write by a woman who believed cursive was a moral quality. The first letters were legal in tone, not from lawyers, but from him pretending to be one. I need to understand your intentions. This departure has created complications that require discussion. Please contact my office. Clinical, cold, the kind of language that treats a woman leaving as a logistical disruption. But the letters changed. Slowly. Over months. The 6th one was shorter. The 7th is the one that almost broke me. I read it in the parking lot of a grocery store. The car smelled like formula and exhaustion, and the particular sweetness of babies who have just been bathed. It was July. Light rain on the windshield. The letter was 1 page. I don't know what I did to make you disappear. I don't know where you are, and it is the only thing I think about. I need to know you're safe. That is all I'm asking. Are you safe? No question mark. A period. As if the answer was already decided, already yes, and he just needed to hear it confirmed. I sat in that car with the rain tapping and the babies asleep in the back seat. 3 car seats bought used from a woman on the next block who carried them down to me and wouldn't take more than $50. And I held that letter against the steering wheel and I wanted to go back. God help me. I wanted to go back. Not to the marriage, not to the arrangement, but to the version of him that sentence described. A man who thinks about me, who needs to know I'm safe, who writes in handwriting his mother taught him. But I knew the way you know which step on the staircase creaks. That tenderness was not separate from the control. It was the same machinery wearing a softer face. A man who keeps a woman in a $14,000 apartment while writing, "I need to know you're safe" to his wife is not torn. He is managing 2 systems. And tenderness is just the one he deploys when authority stops working. I folded the letter. I put it in the manila folder, which by then held the lease, the email photographs, the prepaid phone log, the financial records I'd been slowly building, and a handwritten timeline of every Tuesday, every Thursday, every missing Saturday. I did not write back. I chose strategy over nostalgia. I chose my children over his sentence. And I started looking for a lawyer who understood that the fight ahead couldn't be won with feeling. It needed paperwork. It needed structure. It needed someone who could look at Clause 14C and see what I saw. A door. I found her in Baltimore. Her name was Della Fontaine.
The hardest part of leaving is never the door. It's the morning after. And the morning after that. It's the version of yourself that whispers go back. It wasn't that bad. At least you were warm. Corinne didn't just leave a marriage. She left the entire architecture of safety she'd built around her fear. And she did it pregnant. Alone. With cash in a suitcase lining and no one listed under emergency contact. If you are in that hallway right now, between the life you're leaving and the life you haven't built yet, hear this. Quiet planning is not weakness. Refusing shared money is not pride. It is protection. Documentation is not paranoia. It is the language that systems understand when your voice alone is not enough. Stay close for what comes next. Like this, share it, subscribe, because the women in these hallways deserve to know the corridor has an end.
There is a row house in Federal Hill with a green door and a brass knocker shaped like a fist. I stood in front of it on a Tuesday in September with a stroller wide enough to block the sidewalk and a manila folder that had become the heaviest thing I owned. Inside that door was the woman who would teach me the difference between knowing and proving, between anger and ammunition. Della Fontaine was about to change everything. Della Fontaine's office was on the second floor of that row house, above a tax preparer who had closed for the season and left a paper sign taped to the window that said back in January. The staircase was narrow. I carried one baby in a sling against my chest and maneuvered the double stroller up one step at a time, back wheels first, the way you learn to move through a world that was not built for women carrying what I was carrying. By the time I reached the landing, I was breathing hard, and one of the boys was crying, and the folder was clamped under my arm so tightly the edges had left a red line on my skin. The door was open. Della was sitting behind a desk buried in files, not the polished, organized surface of Hollis's study, but a working desk, stacked, layered. Post-it notes in 3 colors along the edge of her monitor, a coffee mug with a chip on the rim, and a tea bag string hanging over the side, dried and forgotten. Behind her, a window overlooked the street, and the afternoon light came through at an angle that turned the dust in the air into something almost beautiful. She looked at me, then at the stroller, then at the sling, then at the folder. Sit down, not warmly, not coldly, the way a surgeon says it before she tells you what she found. Della was not what I expected. I had imagined someone in a blazer with a firm handshake and a receptionist and framed diplomas on every wall. Della wore a cardigan with the sleeves pushed up past her elbows. Her hair was pulled back with a clip that was losing its grip. Her diplomas were on the wall. 2 of them, but they were behind a coat rack and partially blocked by a calendar from the previous year that no one had taken down. She was not performing competence. She was competent. There is a difference, and I had spent enough time around people who performed everything to recognize it immediately. I handed her the folder. She opened it without ceremony. No questions first, no intake forms. She just read, slowly. The lease agreement, the email photographs, the financial log, the timeline of Tuesdays and Thursdays. She turned each page and set it down on the desk beside her keyboard, and sometimes she'd stop and go back and read something twice. The babies settled. Even they seemed to understand that this room required quiet. When she reached Clause 14C, she read it once. Then she read it again. Then she closed the folder and looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. Brown tortoiseshell frames, slightly too large for her face, and said 5 words. Who drafted this prenuptial agreement? I told her. Hollis's family attorneys, a firm in Manhattan whose name I'd seen on the folio but never researched. Della leaned back in her chair. The springs creaked. They wrote this to protect him. Every clause, every asset shield, every limitation on spousal claims, it's all built to keep you out. Sections 3 through 7 are a wall, but 14C. She tapped the page with one finger. 14C is a crack in their own wall, and they either didn't see it or they assumed no one would ever trigger it because no wife would ever be able to prove sustained conduct to the threshold they set. Can I prove it? That depends on what proving means to you. She opened the folder again, spread the pages across her desk like a map, a lease agreement with his signature. Good. Email correspondence going back before the marriage. Good. A financial trail showing monthly payments to a cohabitation address. We need to deepen that. Bank records, transfer confirmations, anything that shows regularity and duration. What you have is a skeleton. We need to put flesh on it. She picked up the prepaid phone, turned it over, looked at me. This is smart. Cash purchase, no name, no account link. You've been careful. I've been scared. Same result. She almost smiled. Proof isn't truth, Corinne. Proof is what survives cross-examination. Truth is what you know in your body at 3 in the morning. A courtroom doesn't care about 3 in the morning. It cares about timestamps, signatures, account numbers, patterns that can be demonstrated, not just described. She walked me through it, carefully, specifically, the kind of detail that made my chest loosen, because for the first time someone was giving me a process, not just sympathy. Sustained extramarital conduct under Clause 14C required 4 triggers, all verifiable. Financial support, the lease payments, any credit cards or accounts in Genevieve's name connected to Hollis's funds. Cohabitation or equivalent domestic arrangement, proving Genevieve occupied the apartment regularly, not just held the lease. Documented correspondence, the emails but also any texts, shared calendar entries, travel records. Duration exceeding 6 continuous months. The timeline I'd already built did this, but Della wanted it corroborated with external records. You don't need everything, she said. You need enough that his lawyers can't reduce it to ambiguity. The difference between winning and losing this kind of clause is the difference between a story and a file. Stories can be denied. Files can't. She paused, set the phone down, looked at the stroller where my daughter had fallen asleep, with her fist against her mouth. What do you actually want, Corinne? No one had asked me that. Not in those words. Not with that directness. I sat there in a chair with a cracked leather seat in an office above a closed tax preparer, and I told her, I want him to face it. I don't want to disappear and be the woman who left. I want him to sit in a room and hear what he did and know that it has a cost. The money? I stopped. Started again. The money is how he understands cost. So yes, I want the money. But I want the money because it's the only language that room speaks. Della nodded. Not in agreement exactly. In recognition. Then we build the file. And we choose the moment. This is where Della told me something that changed how I understood the entire fight. She pulled up Bellevue Capital's corporate filings on her monitor and turned the screen toward me. Holding companies. Trusts. A structure that looked less like a family business and more like a series of nesting boxes designed to make assets unreachable. The prenup gives you 40%, she said. But 40% of what? If his personal holdings are shielded through trusts, if the family assets are held in entities with independent governance, if the fund itself is structured to separate personal wealth from operational capital, then 40% becomes 40% of whatever they let you see. And people like this? She gestured at the screen. They are very good at not letting you see. The clause was a door. But the house had more rooms than I knew. There's another problem, Della continued. The moment you file, he responds. And he won't respond with a conversation. He'll respond with a legal team that bills more per hour than your apartment costs per month. They will file counter motions. They will challenge jurisdiction. They will seek confidentiality orders and gag provisions. They will try to move the case into arbitration where there are no public records and no witnesses. They will use procedure to exhaust you before the merits are ever heard. She let that sit. So, we don't just file, I said. We don't just file. We choose the moment. We choose the audience. And we make sure that when the file opens, it opens in a room where closing it quietly is no longer an option. The gala. We chose the gala, not for spectacle, not for revenge, for witnesses, for inevitability. The foundation gala was technically a public fundraiser. My name was still Bellevaux. I didn't need an invitation. I needed a dress. And the simple structural reality that if Corinne Bellevaux walks into a room full of Hollis's investors, board members, and social infrastructure, holding a folder and 3 children, he is never publicly acknowledged. He cannot make it disappear. He cannot reclassify it. He cannot say, "Don't do this," to a room of 200 people who have already seen. Della helped me prepare for one more thing. Genevieve. I knew from watching, from my year of quiet collecting, that Genevieve was not loyal to Hollis. Genevieve was loyal to Genevieve. The moment she understood she was not a secret girlfriend but a piece of documented evidence in a legal filing, her calculus would change. She would distance herself, deny the apartment, scrub correspondence, possibly contact Hollis to coordinate a defense. We accounted for that. Every document I had was already copied, time-stamped, and stored in Della's office. The lease bore his signature. The emails were server-stamped. Genevieve could deny until her voice gave out. The paper didn't need her confirmation. The manila folder was ready, not a prop, not a symbol. Procedure. Every page in order. Every timestamp verified. Every receipt, every log entry, every photograph of a screen that a man left open because he never imagined his quiet wife would read it.
The difference between revenge and justice is not the outcome. It is the temperature. Revenge runs hot. It needs an audience for the pain. Justice runs cold. It needs an audience for the record. What Della just taught Corinne is something I want to leave with you tonight. Systems don't respond to pain. They respond to paperwork. And that is not cynical. It is the most empowering thing a person in crisis can learn. That your suffering translated into structure becomes something that cannot be dismissed with 4 words and a closed door. If you found value in this, if these stories make you sharper, more prepared, more willing to believe that clarity is stronger than volume, then stay. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear that a folder can be stronger than a fist.
I bought a dress, navy, simple. Long sleeves because it was December and because my arm still carried the weight of months of holding 3 infants alone. I bought it at a consignment shop in Fells Point. $70, still had the original tags. It fit like it had been waiting for me in that rack between someone's discarded evening wear and a moth-eaten fur stole. The gala was 4 days away. The dress was pressed. The folder was complete. The stroller was cleaned and the babies had outfits. White, all 3. Because I wanted them to look like what they were. New, innocent, real. Hollis Bellevaux had not seen his children, had not spoken to me in over a year, had no idea what was in the folder, or that the prenup he'd built to cage me had a crack wide enough to walk through. 4 days. And then I was going back to that rooftop. The elevator takes 45 seconds. I counted the first time I rode it. The year of the wedding, when I was new and shining and Hollis kept his hand on my waist all night like I was something he'd won. I am counting again now. Not from nerves, from discipline. I need my breathing steady when the doors open. December, 8:15 in the evening. 2 boys in the stroller. My girl in the carrier against my chest. All 3 in white. All 3 asleep. The manila folder is in my left hand. Soft at the edges. Warm from my grip. The elevator opens. The rooftop is glass-walled on 3 sides, open to the sky on the 4th. Heat lamps glow amber along the perimeter. The chandelier throws light in every direction, catching champagne flutes and earrings and the polished faces of people who have never carried a mattress up 3 flights of stairs. A string quartet is playing something I almost recognize, and I stand in the entrance for 3 seconds. I don't move. I let the room find me. It does. The first person to notice is a woman near the coat check. Tall, blonde, holding a clutch that probably cost more than my consignment dress. Her eyes go to the stroller, then to me, then back to the stroller. Her mouth opens slightly, not to speak but to process. Beside her, a man in a charcoal suit follows her gaze and stops mid-sentence. The whisper starts there and moves across the room like weather. I can feel it without hearing it. A shift in pressure, a recalibration. Heads turning. Conversations stalling. The quartet keeps playing, but the music becomes the only sound that isn't looking at me. I push the stroller forward. Slowly. The wheels make no sound on the polished floor. The only thing about this moment that is quiet. Hollis is standing near the far window. I see him before he sees me. He is wearing a black suit. No tie. Top button open. The way he wears formal clothes when he wants to communicate that formality is beneath him. He is holding a glass of something dark. Genevieve is beside him. Emerald dress. Her hand is on his arm. Daphne is 3 feet away, speaking with a silver-haired man I recognize as the chairman of the foundation board. Genevieve sees me first. Her hand leaves Hollis's arm. It doesn't drop. It retreats. A small, precise withdrawal, the kind of movement that looks casual but isn't. Her chin lifts. Her eyes go to the stroller, then to the folder, and something crosses her face that I have never seen there before. Not anger, not embarrassment. Arithmetic. She is calculating. How much do I know? What is in that folder? How exposed is she? Whether the door behind her is closer than the woman in front of her? She takes 1 step back. Then another. She turns to say something to a woman beside her. A nothing sentence, a placeholder, and angles her body toward the interior hallway. She's going to leave. I expected this. Della expected this. The paper doesn't need her in the room. Hollis turns. He sees me, and for one moment, one breath, one fraction of a second that I will carry for the rest of my life, his face empties. Not shock exactly, vacancy, the expression of a man who has encountered something he has no file for. His wife, 3 children, a folder, here, in this room, in front of these people. Then the mask returns. Quickly, but not quickly enough. 200 people have already seen what I saw. The blank, the gap, the half-second where Hollis Beliveau did not know what to do. I do not go to him. I walk to the bar. I order water, sparkling, with lime. The bartender, a young man in a black vest who is trying very hard not to look at the stroller, pours it into a glass and slides it across the marble counter. I take it. I sip. I wait. Because I know Hollis. I know him the way you know a machine after years of watching it operate. He cannot tolerate an uncontrolled variable. He cannot allow a scene he did not choreograph to play out without his hand on it. He will come to me. Not because he wants to, because he has to. 90 seconds. He crosses the room. His stride is measured, not fast, not slow. He buttons his jacket as he walks. A grooming gesture. A man putting himself in order before he manages a situation. He stops 2 feet from me, looks at the stroller, looks at the carrier against my chest, looks at me. What are you doing here, Corinne? Not a question, a period. The same grammar as the letter. The same tone as don't do this. A reclassification. I am again the woman who is doing something inappropriate, the woman who must be managed. But I am not in his bathroom holding his jacket anymore. I am in a room full of his investors, his board, his mother, his infrastructure. And I have a folder. I lift it. I open it. I show him the top page only, the lease agreement, Upper West Side, his signature, Genevieve's name, $14,000 a month, his handwriting on the guarantor line, the same left slanting cursive his mother taught him. I watch him read it. I watch his jaw set. I watch his eyes move from the page to my face and back to the page, and I see the exact moment he understands that this is not a confrontation. This is a notification. You have 3 children, I say. My voice is level. I have practiced this. Not in a mirror. In the dark, in the Highlandtown apartment, whispering to the ceiling while the radiator clanked. 2 boys and a girl. They are 10 months old. They are healthy. They are here. I close the folder. Your attorneys and mine will meet at 10 a.m. I am not negotiating here. I am not making a scene. I am telling you what happens next. He says nothing. His glass is still in his hand. The dark liquid catches the chandelier light, and for a moment it looks like the glass is the only thing keeping him vertical. I turn the stroller. I push it toward the elevator. I do not look back. Behind me, the room is doing what rooms do when power shifts in real time. Reorganizing. Whispers that are not whispers. Glances that are not glances. The social architecture of Hollis Bellevaux's world, recalculating. The elevator doors close. 45 seconds down. My daughter wakes up and makes a sound. Not a cry. Something softer. A question. And I press my hand against her chest through the carrier and whisper, almost there, almost there, almost there. The lobby is marble and empty, and my heels echo like a second heartbeat. I did it. I walked in with the triplets and the prenup, and I walked out with my spine intact and the room behind me rearranged. The gala was not the end. I knew that. Della had warned me. The gala was the opening shot, the moment that made silence impossible. The real war would be fought in conference rooms and courthouses, and in the particular language of motions and counter-motions that most people never learn to speak. But for 9 minutes on that rooftop, I was not a woman from Southeast DC who signed a document she didn't read. I was not a woman who hung a jacket in a closet and lay down beside a man who had reclassified her pain as her misbehavior. I was a woman with proof, with 3 children who deserved to exist in the open, with a clause that their own attorneys had written and never imagined would be turned and aimed. For 9 minutes, I was the door, and it swung. The next morning, I sat in Della's conference room, a table that seated 4, scratched along one edge, a water pitcher with a crack in the handle that she'd taped with clear packing tape. The folder was open between us. We were ready. The door opened at 9:58 a.m. Hollis walked in. Behind him, not beside him, behind him, in formation, 4 attorneys, 3 men, 1 woman, matching briefcases, matching posture. The woman set a document on the table before anyone sat down. Blue backing, court stamps, a counterfiling. Della picked it up. Read the first page. Read the second. Her face didn't change, which is how I knew it was bad. When Della's face doesn't change, it means she's already calculating how much harder the fight just became. She set it down, looked at me. They're not contesting the clause, she said quietly. They're contesting you. Jurisdiction, residency, custody standing, and they filed for an emergency confidentiality order that would seal every document you have before a judge ever sees it. The room was very still. Hollis sat across from me, hands folded on the table, and he looked at me the way he looked at me through the French doors at our wedding. Directly, without moving. The cage had more than one door, and some of them, I was learning, lock from the outside. Della closed the counter filing, set it on top of my folder, 2 stacks of paper, one on top of the other, like layers of a story that hadn't finished being told. She looked at Hollis's attorneys. We'll need a continuance, she said. 10 days. The woman across the table almost smiled. You'll have 5. Della didn't blink. Then we'll use 5. She turned to me, and in her eyes I saw something I hadn't expected. Not defeat. Not worry. Curiosity, the kind that comes right before a person finds the piece they didn't know was missing. Their own filing, she said, so low only I could hear. Page 9. They were so busy trying to take your children that they forgot what they were admitting about his. Give me tonight. I looked at the folder. My folder. The one with the soft edges and the warm paper and every truth I'd collected since the night I smelled perfume on a jacket and chose silence over questions. It sat underneath their counter-filing like a heartbeat buried under noise. But heartbeats are patient, and mine had learned to wait.